Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Kiddushin. This is our 10th class and our penultimate class, meaning next week we will be finishing Be'ezrat Hashem. Be'ezrat Hashem, we will be finishing Masechet Kiddushin. Really, it finishes on Friday, but we're going to try to finish it early on Wednesday so we can finish it all together. So Be'ezrat Hashem, that will be next week. One more announcement about next week. Excuse me. One more announcement about next week is that Israel is going to be changing its clocks on Saturday night. And I think in America, you're not changing your clocks. Is that correct? I don't think so. I don't know. Does anyone know?
That's correct.
Okay. So if that's the case, then everyone who is outside of Israel, we will be an hour less ahead of you. So if now we are 7 hours ahead, we will be 6 hours. So if we're 8 or 9 for Aliza, we will be 1 hour less than that. So just make sure, I'll send a reminder when I send the email tomorrow, next week. But we'll just, hopefully everyone will be here next week for our Siyum, our last class of Masechet Kiddushin. Okay, today we are going to be reviewing Daf 67 to 73. And the Mishnah begins by telling us, and it's foreshadowing the next chapter that we're going to get to in the next daf. But the Mishnah tells us that if the husband and the wife were permitted to each other to get married, so then the child's status goes according to the father. Meaning, if a Jewish man marries a Jewish woman, and the father is a Kohen, the child is a Kohen. If the father is a Levi, so then the child is a Levi. If they could be married, but there is a prohibition, a negative commandment that they should not really be married, so then the child goes according to whoever is the blemished one. And here blemished means whoever was the wrong one who got married, right? So if you have a widow to a high priest, a Kohen Gadol, or a Kohen to a divorcee, right? So in theory, there is Kiddushin, but the child then is not going to be a Kohen because that was a forbidden relationship. The third category is the third category is if she can't have Kiddushin with this person, meaning really they cannot get married according to Jewish law, but she could get married to somebody else. So then the child is a mamzer, what we would call illegitimate, but mamzer has a greater connotation we'll see as we continue tonight. So meaning, again, right, if she is married to a person, which is fine, and then a woman has an affair with somebody else and she gets pregnant from that affair, so then the child is a mamzer. The fourth category is if she can't marry anybody, meaning there's something, again, I don't want to use the word wrong, but there's something about her legal status, then the child goes according to her, right? So let's say if a woman is not Jewish and she marries a Jew, so then the child is not Jewish. Or if the woman is a maidservant, a shifcha, so again, the child goes according to the mother and not according to the father. So now the Gemara explains on Daf 67 that if you have a ger, a convert, plus a mamzeret, mamzeret means a daughter of a relationship that was forbidden. So there is Kiddushin, but we don't follow the father, meaning the father, the child is actually a mamzer because the mother was a mamzer or a mamzeret. And the Gemara says another opinion is no, there isn't Kiddushin, meaning they can't actually get married. So when the Mishnah says, what is this case? Is it an inclusion or an exclusion, right? Things are not mentioned, but are included in the category because it says, right, kol makom, everywhere. So that's inclusionary. So the Gemara brings up other cases, right? We mentioned a convert, we mentioned mamzer. So now the Gemara is going to mention other categories of people who marry into Israel. So the law is that the halacha is that an Egyptian is allowed to convert, but they're only really accepted into Israel in the third generation. So let's say the man is second generation Egyptian and he marries a first generation woman, like Egyptian convert. So then who do we go according to? The second or the first? So the Gemara says that the child is third generation, meaning we go according to the man, right? So if the father was second generation, his child is third generation, which makes him the child a convert and accepted into Judaism. And the Gemara says, no, there's another opinion that the child actually is only second generation, that we go according to the mother, right? If the mother is first, so her child would be second. So we see it's a machloket if our Mishnah is inclusionary or exclusionary. Let's say, again, we have two non-Jews who are from, let's say, different nations. We go according to the father. If they convert, so then we go according to the blemished one, meaning whoever is less halachically, less part of the Jewish nation. Let's say you have, so the Gemara explains that for non-Jews, we have two levels of non-Jews. There are all the nations of the world, those are regular non-Jews. And then we have the 7 nations that lived in Israel that we actually had a commandment to destroy. We call them the Knaanim, the Canaanites, but it's a whole bunch of nations that lived here. So let's say, again, remember we're talking about 2 non-Jews who get married. So let's say the father is from another nation and the mother is Knaani. So then what do we see the child as? So the one opinion is the child is like the regular nations and can be bought as a slave, or we see him as, I don't want to use the word not a threat, but we see him as not Knaani, right? But if the father was Knaani, was Canaanite, and the mother was from another nation, so then the child is seen as Knaani, right? So we go according to the father. Let's say they convert. Let's say you have, again, an Egyptian father and a woman who comes from Ammon. So now we know that a male from Ammon is not allowed to convert, but a female is, right? We see this from Megillat Ruth, even though she's from Moab, but Ammon and Moab have the same status, where, right, Ruth is Moavi, but she is allowed, or Moaviyah, she's allowed to convert, whereas her male counterpart would not be allowed to convert. So let's say we have an Egyptian father and an Ammonite. Again, she's allowed to convert, and therefore she's okay. Let's say we have the opposite. Let's say we have an Ammoni, the father is from Ammon, and the mother is from Egypt. So the child is like the father. Therefore, sorry, 1 second. So the child is like the father, but if they have a daughter, she is seen as mitzrit, and therefore she is okay. As we said, there's no kiddushin with an erva, right? You cannot legally, according to Jewish law, betroth someone you're forbidden to marry. And this we learn from the verse in the Torah, that kiddushin is only right with someone who is not related to you, right? Not a relation, and therefore, right, we see it from the verse, and we also learn it from again from other relations, right? From the wife's sister, or the Eshet Ach, right? The wife of the brother, right? Again, that goes to when we do Yibum. But Nida, right, in our in the chapter that lists the forbidden relations in Vayikra chapter 18. So we have many different relations. If you remember, we did this in Masachet Yevamot, but at the end of that chapter, we also have a nida, a woman who is menstruating. Now, that's not a relation, but it's not a relative, but you also cannot have relations with a woman who is menstruating. And we know that you can betroth a woman who is menstruating, right? A nida. So therefore, that would not be the case here. It's not included in our list of arayot, of forbidden relationships, when we're talking about kiddushin. And the Gemara says that that's only when we're talking about when the punishment is karet, right? The punishment is very, very severe. Okay. We also know that, so the Gemara goes through all the cases that we had in the Mishnah and quotes the verses that teach us all of these ideas, right? So for a non-Jew, the verse says that you're not allowed to marry a non-Jew. Therefore, because you cannot marry them, if you try to, it doesn't work, right? There is, the language of the Gemara is, there is no kiddushin, meaning if you say, you are going to be betrothed to me with this ring, it doesn't work if it's a person you're not allowed to be married to. Okay, right, so again, a non-Jew, let's say if the mother is a non-Jew, so then the child, again, is not Jewish. If there's a non-Jewish father and a Jewish mother, the child is Jewish, but the child is not called a mamzer. The child is not called illegitimate, but they are disqualified from certain things. Okay. Daf 69, sorry, before it was Daf 68. Now Daf 69, right? Let's say a person says to his maidservants, to his shifcha, you are free, but the child you're going to have is going to be a slave. So the question is, does that work, right? Because again, if we said the child is like the mother, if the mother is free, so then the child should be free. So the Gemara says, well, the owner has the right to say the child is going to be my slave and you are free. Or no, the father of the child, but the master does not have that ability. As soon as he frees the mother and then she gives birth, that child will be free. The last Mishnah in this chapter says that mamzerim, again, these children that are a result of a forbidden relationship, can purify themselves. How do they do that? If the mamzer marries a shifcha, a maidservant, then the child becomes an eved, right? It is exactly what we just said before. If the mother is a servant, then the child is a servant. And then the master, right, the father, can set him free. And as soon as he's set free, he's a regular Yisrael, he's a regular Jew and not blemished in the sense of being a mamzer. Or another opinion in the Mishnah is that doesn't work, and he will still stay a mamzer and a slave. And the Gemara says, is this something that we should do, or is it something that you could do? And it seems that there are cases that prove that it is something that one should do. And then the Gemara says, no, maybe it's only like b'di'evet, only after the fact would it be okay to do this. Okay, and with that, we end the third chapter. And now we're going to begin the fourth chapter. And here we are going to be discussing different groups of people that are part of the Jewish nation. I think that, I mean, there's a lot to say, but I think that I think it's difficult. There are two, I would say, competing factors here. On one hand, we don't want to embarrass anybody, and we love all Jews, and everyone is part of the Jewish nation, and we accept everyone. And with that, I think that there's a tension that people, let's say, will want to marry the best person they can find, or the purest, Jew that they can find. Again, I don't know if this is something that happens nowadays, but definitely, and we'll see this in a few minutes, people are looking to make the best matches for themselves, for their children, and I think some of these things are going to be a little sensitive to us, like why would you not accept everybody? But it's a fact, and I guess we'll talk more about it as we continue. So when we begin this chapter, it's important to recognize that there are, the Gemara is going to tell us that there are 10 classes of people in the Jewish nation, and we'll see who can marry who. So I'll go through each one. So the Gemara is also going to explain this, but the Mishnah basically tells us that when Ezra, this is the time of the return to Zion, what we call in Hebrew Shivat Zion. This is after the 70-year exile in Babylonia. Ezra, the leader of the Jewish people at that time, brought many people from Bavel, not everyone. Many people stayed in Bavel, but he brought the Jews to Israel. And the Gemara is going to explain, and the Mishnah as well, that he took anyone who had questionable lineage. The idea was he felt he was taking all of the sages, he was taking everyone who was sensitive to these topics, to this idea, and therefore he wanted to take all of these questionable people so that he can kind of be in charge of them, or he can take care of them. He didn't want to leave them in Bavel. There are going to be repercussions to that, as we will see in a minute. So I'm going to go through all of these things. We'll go through each one. So, okay. Wait, before that, I want to also explain the different lineages and who they are or not allowed to marry. So let's just, before we read the Mishnah, a mamzer, as I mentioned, right, as people say mamzer, this is illegitimate. A mamzer is, as I mentioned, a child from a prohibited relation. Ammoni and Moavi, people from Ammon and Moab. The males are not allowed to convert. The females are, as I mentioned before. People from Edom, right, Edomites, or from Egypt, they are allowed to convert, but the first two generations of converts are still seen as not Jewish. Only in the third generation can they marry into the Jewish people. A non-Jewish slave, an Eved Knani, while he is enslaved, he is not allowed to marry a Jew. When he is free, he is allowed to marry a Jewish person. Okay, so that's a slave. Who are the people that are not okay, let's do it the other way. A Kohen, a priest, is not allowed to marry a divorcee, a Chalila, which means the daughter of a Kohen who married someone who he wasn't allowed to marry. So that's called Chalila, and a Zonah, normally translated as a harlot, someone who was promiscuous before she was married. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is not allowed to marry a widow, and he must marry a virgin. That is not the case for a Kohen, a regular priest. Okay, so now here is the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us there are 10 classes, so I'll just read through them and then we'll go through it. The first 3, Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, right? I think we're familiar with the priests, the Levites, and everyone else. Chalalim, as we mentioned, right? Chalalim are Kohanim who are either like children or they married someone they weren't allowed to marry. Converts, Gerim, freed slaves, a mamzerim, Netin is someone who came from a nation called the Givonim. They were a nation in the time of Yoshua. They tricked Yoshua into making peace with them. So they convert, but they don't convert. So that's called a Netin. A Shtuki, which we'll explain in a minute. There are 2 things that we'll explain. Shtuki, from the word to be quiet, lishtok, and a Sufi, like to gather. We'll explain these 2 people, these 2 children, in a minute. So the Mishnah tells us that the first 3 can marry each other, right? Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, they can marry each other. And then from Levi and till the freed slaves, they can marry each other, right? The Levi, the Israel, the Chalalim, the convert, and the free slave, they can all marry each other, right? Meaning the Kohen is not allowed to marry those people. And then from converts till the end, till a Sufi, they can all marry each other. Okay, now the Mishnah tells us, what is this shtuki? A shtuki is a child or a person that knows who his mother is, but he doesn't know who his father is. And a Sufi is someone who doesn't know either parent. Okay, right, again, really, right, is it important? Is it not important? We'll see. But we'll see. So again, this whole chapter is talking about lineage. I don't think, and again, I'll try to say it a few times, like I think that the Torah, I think that Judaism loves people who choose to become Jewish on their own. But with that, because we're talking about lineage, they are, in this time, they are looking to marry the purest person, right? The person with the purest lineage. It doesn't mean that they're the best Jew, but right now we're talking about lineage. So I just want to put that out there. Okay, so now the Gemara tells us that the Mishnah uses the word that they ascended from Bavel to Israel, right? Alu to Bavel. And I think this is very fitting for this week, as I think that this week is, because of Parshat Lech Lecha, we're going to read Lech Lecha this Shabbat. This Parsha is all about making Aliyah, right? Abraham moves to Israel. So here the Gemara says, why does the Gemara use the word going up to Israel, right? It teaches us that when you move to Israel, it's called Aliyah, right? So that is, the Gemara tells us this on Daf 69. right? It's called going up, right? The verse says that God will bring us up to Israel. So I think it's a very beautiful image and something that we say nowadays as well. Right? The temple is higher than anywhere else in the world. So too is Israel higher than any other country in the world, not topographically, but spiritually. Right? As we said, Ezra took all the sages with him to Israel, and therefore he took all of these people with him, these people with questionable lineage. Or, right, again, the question is, did he take them? Or did they come with him, right? Was it forceful or was it voluntary? And that is a machloket in the Gemara. It says that Ezra wasn't aware of all the the ksherim, the pure people with him, like the Kohanim and the Leviim. And here the Gemara goes through different verses from Ezra, from the Tanakh, that prove who comes with him, right? So Kohanim and Leviim and Chalalim, right? Nehemiah says that they can eat truma. There's a machloket if a halal, again, halal is a kohen, a priest who is either was in a forbidden relationship or is the offspring of a forbidden relationship. So the question is, can they eat truma? Again, truma being the sanctified gifts from the Jews. So that is a machloket here on Daf 69. It says that there's a verse that proves that converts and free slaves came to Israel. Again, we're going through the list of all these 10 to show how they came to Israel. There's a story of Yochanan, who's the son of Tuvia the slave, and he had a Jewish mother. And they say that he was a mamzer. That's according to one opinion. And then the Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. And maybe they were, again, maybe he was a mamzer or he wasn't, again, not clear. The rest of the verse alludes to the fact that the shtuki and a sufi, these are people who don't know their parents, and there's a verse that alludes that they came with Ezra as well. Another verse alludes to other like cities that God like said, right? God wanted them to be this way, right? God wanted the Jewish people to be like cherubs, like a kruv, but then they acted like namer. So people from these cities seem to be not behaving in the right way, or even though they behaved in the wrong way, God still loved them. And here the Gemara says that you shouldn't marry a woman who isn't appropriate for you. And this is based on a verse. You also shouldn't marry a woman for money. If she has a blemished lineage, but she has a lot of money, you shouldn't marry her either. And so now we're going to get into some psychology. The Gemara says that if a person accuses somebody else of having blemished genealogy, often, like not just once, but does it a lot, it's probably because they themselves are blemished, right? They have some sort of blemish in their genealogy. And there's a story of a person who called Rav Yehuda a slave in front of his agent, in front of his shaliach. They were like standing in line. And when Rav Yehuda heard this, he proclaimed that this man, right, you think it's me, it's you, you're the slave. And then he excommunicates him. And then the man subpoenas him to go to Rav Nachman's court, right, because he called him a slave. So now he's upset. When Rav Yehuda went to see Rav Nachman, there's an interesting dialogue between the two of them, that he keeps correcting his vocabulary, and Rav Nachman gets very upset, but then Rav Nachman says, well, what are you doing here? Like, why did you call the guy a slave? And he quotes to him a saying by Shmuel that says that anybody who calls somebody else a slave is probably because they themselves were a slave, were from slaves. And the man claimed that the man said, what do you mean I'm a slave? I come from the Hashmonaim, from the Hasmonean dynasty, right? I come from a dynasty of kings. And then Rav Yehuda quotes Shmuel again, saying that if anybody claims to be from the Hasmonean dynasty, then they really are slaves. And the commentary explains that Herod actually killed all the Hashmonaim, and then he took over, and Herod himself was really a slave. And therefore, right, because he was a slave, Jewish women didn't want to marry him. And therefore, right, because he was a slave, all his descendants are really slaves. And therefore, it shows that Rabbi Yehuda was really right, and that this person really was from a descendant of slaves. And then Rabbi Yehuda continues to quote Shmuel, saying, don't start up with me because I'm going to tell you which families in the city are really disqualified, which also goes to show that people didn't know. So that's also very interesting. Other sages had traditions of other families that were blemished or came from impure genealogy, that they came from slaves maybe. And then the Gemara talks about different villages that, this man had many slaves, and then they all married Kohanim. So then many of the Kohanim in that area were pasul, were blemished. And they say that the sign for this is that they're very brazen. If they're brazen, it must be that they came from these slaves. The Gemara says that God rests his divine presence only on genealogically fit families in Israel. One second. Okay. Thank you. Now, Daf 71. The Gemara tells us that God will purify the tribes. And again, it's interesting how we understand purify, right? Is it that I don't think it's about separating. I think it's about making everybody okay. So the Gemara says that once families of mamzerim marry into Israel, they won't be separated out in the time of Moshiach, right? They're just all going to be counted as pure Jews. Okay, let's go back to the idea that if Ezra took all of these people with questionable lineage to Israel, then Bavel was left with pure genealogy. So the Gemara is, fascinatingly discusses this idea and now this tension between Bavel and Israel, right? Israel was always seen as the center. But now, based on what we just said, Bavel is genealogically superior to Israel, because Israel now has all of these people with questionable lineage, and Bavel doesn't. So throughout different generations, they wanted to say that Bavel was actually right on a lower level than Israel. But it didn't work because, as we mentioned, Bavel had the pure genealogy. And the Gemara describes that people had the ability to say who was pure and who wasn't, but unfortunately, or whatever, there were people that were very powerful with blemished lineage, and they didn't want anybody to know. So it became very dangerous to expose anybody, and therefore they decided to leave it. Different families had reputations for being pure or impure, right? And there were different families that are mentioned. And the Gemara says, Eliyahu, right? Elijah will come and reveal everything in the end of days. As I mentioned, the sages did not want to publicize which families were tainted. However, the Gemara does tell us that they did pass on the information from one generation to the other discreetly. And I think it's fascinating. There's, I think in some communities, they have, let's say, in the Rabbanit, a list of all the families and who married who. And that's generally kept top secret, not to be publicized. From here, since we're talking about things that are known but not known, the Gemara mentions the different names of God, the four-letter name of God, which we know Yud and then a Hey and then a Yud and then a Vav and then a Hey, but we pronounce it differently than the way that it is written. And only certain people know how to pronounce that name. There's also a 12-letter name of God and a 42-letter name of God. And these traditions were passed down, but again, were not publicized. Okay, as we said, right, anyone from Bavel is assumed to have pure lineage. All other lands are assumed to have impure lineage, and you have to prove that you come from, again, a proper background. And people of Israel, if they're known to be, questionable or impure, then they're impure. But if they're known to be pure, so then they're known to be pure. Again, if you're marrying into the family, you assume that you need to check it out. And if you are already married, we assume that everything is fine. From here, the Gemara has a story about Zeiri, who didn't want to marry Rabbi Yochanan's daughter because she came from Eretz Yisrael, which again is fascinating because Rabbi Yochanan is literally the leader of the Jewish people at the time in Israel. But because they were from Israel, he questioned their lineage. And on the other hand, Zeiri was very respectful of Rabbi Yochanan and his Torah. So Rabbi Yochanan said, you respect my Torah, but you won't marry my daughter. You think that there weren't pure people, left. There weren't pure people here in Israel. And again, they go back and forth. It seems people were very concerned on who to marry. From here, the Gemara discusses the borders of Bavel, of Babylonia. So I brought you this map. This is from the Art Scroll Gemara. But as you can see, there are two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. These, right, the Hidekel and the Prat, these are the two borders of Israel, of Bavel. And then the Gemara discusses what are again, I guess if you kind of tilt it a little bit, we can say the rivers are, kind of going east-west, and then what are the northern and southern borders, or you can flip it the other way. But the Gemara discusses the different cities that are seen as part of Bavel or not part of Bavel. So here you can see different cities that are, again, they talk more about it as upstream and downstream. It says that the on Daf 72, the Gemara discusses that when Rebbe was about to die, he revealed different cities of Bavel, and how they had blemished lineage, certain cities in particular. And the Gemara says that when Rebbe died, that was the day that Rabbi Yehuda was born. And the Gemara explains that when a great sage dies, another is born, right? This concept of when the sun sets, right, a new sun or the same sun, but the new sun rises, just like the idea of when Eli, the prophet, dies, Shmuel takes over, Samuel takes over. And now, since we're talking about people dying, the Gemara discusses Yechezkel, who mourned a certain person when they died. The question is, was he good or was he bad? So we mentioned, right, Bavel is seen as pure, and everywhere else is seen as not. The sages say no. That opinion is a minority opinion. The majority opinion is actually that not just the people in Bavel are seen as pure, but all lands. We assume that most people come from appropriate or unblemished lineage, unless you know that there's something in particular with a specific family. As we mentioned, eventually all the mamzerim and nitinim will be purified, or maybe not, right? Again, maybe only one and not the other. A convert can marry a female who's a mamzeret, or maybe not. Another option, another thing is we talked about a kohen, a priest, and who he's allowed to marry. The Gemara says that a female kohenet, right, a female, the daughter of a kohen, is allowed to marry a convert, even though the opposite is not true, right? A male kohen is not allowed to marry a female convert. Daf 73 tells us that, again, are they allowed to marry converts or not? Again, depending on the case that we just mentioned. It says that the female kohanot, right, are not prohibited from marrying people who have these blemished lineages. Rabbi Zera taught that converts can marry, again, the daughter of a priest or a mamzer. Okay, now let's go to Shtuki. As we said, Shtuki is where he knows who his mother is, but not his father. So we say, right, that according to biblical law, he can marry anyone. Right, we assume that the majority of people are unblemished, are kasher. Okay, so we assume that most people are kasher. But the question is, maybe the shtuki is unfit to marry because maybe he'll marry his sister, right? If he doesn't know who his father is, then he can't know who his relatives are. But the Gemara says, well, that can't be the case because that seems very unlikely. Or maybe the only reason is because the rabbis set a very high standard for lineage, for what we call in Hebrew yichus, right? Yichus is lineage, and therefore the rabbis did set a high standard. The asufi, again, he doesn't know who any of his, either of his parents are. Again, biblically can marry anybody, but only rabbinically is not allowed to. Again, both parents are unknown. We assume that that this is a child of a forbidden relationship. Again, let's go into the psychology of that. I think the concept here is, who would abandon their child? It must be that it was a forbidden relationship, and that's why they couldn't keep their child, which again, I think is fascinating just in terms of the psychology of it. The Gemara now discusses, can we make that assumption, right? So the Gemara says, if you find a baby and the baby has a brit milah, is circumcised, then you know it's not an asufi, meaning it's not someone who we're going to already assume that there's an issue with his lineage, right? Because the point is, why would you go through all the trouble to circumcise the child if you didn't want the child in the first place. Therefore, it must be that really you wanted to keep the child, but you just can't. And here the Gemara discusses the concept of poverty, right? That if you have too many mouths to feed, unfortunately, the reality is that you might be forced to abandon your child. And here the Gemara talks about how you find the child. So one is circumcised, meaning they took the time to circumcise the child. Let's say you found the child with an amulet or rubbed with oil or with powder. All of these things show that the parents loved him, but they just can't keep him. And that it's probably because of extenuating circumstances and not because of who the parents are. And therefore, we don't assume that the child is illegitimate, that the child is blemished in terms of lineage. Let's say, this is unfortunately the flip side, right? If you find a child or the baby where a wild animal could have gotten to him, so then you assume the child is a Sufi, right? You assume that the parents did not want this child, they abandoned him and left him to die, basically. This seems to imply that the child is coming from a forbidden relationship. And again, right, if he's abandoned to die, we say it's a Sufi. And if it's not abandoned to die, right, meaning you put him on the steps of the firehouse of the fire station. So then you want the child to be found, and really it's because you just can't provide for this child, right? If you find the child in a very public place, again, it's not as considered an asufi. If you find it on the side of the road, also not. If you find the baby in the middle of the road, now we assume that you are trying to literally get rid of the child. During a year of famine, we do not assume any found children are a Sufi. We assume that it's all because people don't have the means to feed this child. If one of the parents identifies the child while they're still on the street, so then we believe them, right? If you say, oh no, it's my child, we believe them, and then they're not a Sufi. But if the child was already taken away from where they were found, now you need two witnesses to prove who the child's parent is. But again, if it's during a famine, you only need one witness. The Gemara, since we're talking about who's believed to talk about this child, the Gemara says that there are 3 people who are believed immediately after an event, right, about an Asufi. So that's the people about an Asufi, right? They can testify, a midwife, and a woman testifying about possible nida status. So now the Gemara explains, again, Asufi, we explained, you have to testify while the baby is still wherever you found him. A midwife can say which baby was born first, right? Let's say there were twins. The midwife can testify who came out first. Again, this is important if we're talking about the firstborn, right? We want to know which one is first, right? And this is as long as she doesn't leave the house, because while she's still in it, so then she can testify, or maybe even after she leaves, right? We assume that she'll remember which one was which. What's this case about a woman testifying about nida status, about menstruation? The case is that there were 3 women who slept in the same bed, right? It was a slumber party, and then they wake up and there's blood found, menstrual blood, under one of the women. So everyone checks. If one of the women says, oh, it came from me, so then we assume that it came from her, and the other 2 women are seen as pure, right? Tehorot, they are not menstruating. And this is only if it happens immediately. The midwife, as we mentioned, is believed about the twins. She's also believed, and this is a case of 4 people giving birth in the same room. She's believed to say this baby was from the Cohen family, and this baby was from the Levi family, right? She can say who is which baby's from which family, and she is believed. And with that, I think we're going to finish for today, because the next topic is going to talk about commerce and who is believed when dealing with commerce and things that are sold. I saw that there were some questions. One second. Lynn wrote, when listening to the genealogies called out for those making aliyah to the Torah, sometimes I hear machloket. Is this where one of the names, one second, one of the names of the ancestor is unknown or said to be more than one name? I have never heard that. I've never heard of that being said when called up to the Torah. I think when people don't know the name, so then they'll say Abraham for the father or Sarah for the mother, but I am not sure what you are referring to. So I don't
call
know.
Them Israel then? Don't they just call them Israel?
Yes, yes, meaning like the first two are called by Kohen or Levi. After that, we don't say Israel, but I think I've never seen that. Interesting.
If you
I didn't write that very well. I didn't mean when they're looking for a Kohen, a Levi, or an Israel.
Okay.
After they've done the reading, then they stand in my congregation, and as they're being blessed, their genealogy is being called out. And I'm new to this community, so I'm just trying to, and I thought that was just very interesting and can go on for quite a while, where it's just like Bat so-and-so and or Ben so-and-so, it just goes on. And then every once in a while, as they're going up the chain back to Adam, or whatever, we hear Mechloket, and then he'll go on. So I just wondered what that was about. If it related.
I think that maybe, I think you're referring to the Mishaberach, the blessing that we give the person who gets the aliyah. Generally, at least what I'm familiar with in our congregation, generally it is not the person's genealogy, rather it is the person's family members, meaning generally they say, we give you a blessing, and to your wife, and it says their name, and to your child, your children, your parents. So generally, that's the way the Mishaberach works. I haven't heard machloket. I haven't heard, but I don't know.
Well, thank you. That's helpful. Because I don't, I didn't really understand exactly what was going on. Everything is in Hebrew. In this congregation, and I miss things, but I thought I was hearing a genealogy. So thank you so much.
Okay, my pleasure. Generally, it's the family members. In some congregations, they'll have like a card where everyone fills out. So you don't have to memorize all the names, but generally, it's the family members, either parents or children or whoever you want to bless. So that's generally the way it works.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I have seen the Goodbye using those cards, and
Right.
at the time, but then also interacting with the person and taking more or whatever. And then once in a while, I would hear that, and maybe it's not machloket. That I'm familiar with that term, but maybe I'm hearing something else.
Maybe I have not. I have never heard of that, but it could be that it sounds similar, but maybe different.
Rabbi, I cannot raise my hand because I messed up my computer. Just tell me what time you're keeping in Israel. If it's 9 o'clock, I can figure it out.
Meaning next week class will be at 9, but we're changing the clocks, which means just class will be at 9 o'clock Israel time next week.
Yeah, I can figure it out from there.
Great, that's it. It'll be regular for Israel time. It'll be 9 o'clock. For other people, it might be just check, I guess, Google or check what time it will be.
Now answer, who knows how to correctly pronounce the tetragrammaton?
So nowadays we don't really know how to pronounce God's name. We say the word Adoshem, right? Or we say that word, but that's really not the way it's written.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Okay. Okay, wishing everyone a wonderful week. We should just hear good news and have peace as soon as possible. And of course, our learning, I should have said this in the beginning, our learning is in the merit of speedy recovery for everyone who needs it. It's in the memory of the people who were killed and for the speedy return of all the hostages.
Amen.
Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
Thank you.